All right, code keepers, we're back and we're going to have an interesting conversation. We have back on the platform, Dr. I'm going to say it right. I'm going to say it right because I want to get slapped. Dr. Kimya Nuru Dennis. Do I get a slap or do I get an A-OK? I got an A-OK. All right. Good Seiko. Good Seiko. And we have good brother, Minister Zobi. What's up, bro?
Hey,
Yeah, with the cash machine in the background. You always got that cash machine popping, man. Tonight we're going to talk about immigration. And I guess this whole conversation really kind of peaked off after some political conversations that we're not going to mention, right? We had that conversation yesterday. And the conversation about immigration and how it impacts us needs to be had. And the good thing is, Dr. Dennis here has a wealth of information, reading, life experiential data that she can bring to the table so we can have a better understanding about how this all works. So uh, I called it nothing new, nothing new, because we've been dealing with this for generations. U.S. employment connects with U.S. immigration for generations. So, Doc, what's this all about? Tell us.
Yeah, this is actually for centuries. So when we talk about it historically, we're talking about Africans forced on the Western Hemisphere due to transatlantic slavery. And that's all the stolen land that became Caribbean, South America, North America, which is United States of America and Canada. And so when you look at that shift, the Industrial Revolution, and then talk about the flow of migration. So I teach sociology of race and race and ethnic relations. And if anyone ever gets the book written by John Meyer, which is what I use for race courses to understand the sociology of race, we're actually talking about the origins of racial categories for 5 centuries. We talk about immigrant populations, so the ethnicities and nations of people, of origins, and racial categories, by the way, originated on Eastern Hemisphere, and they did not originate on Western Hemisphere. For people who think that race is just a USA thing, that's false. But to understand all of this is the only way to understand the economic system, understand employment system, and also understand how this shapes migration. So, I mean, there's so much. That's why I always say you have to tell me exactly what to focus on, because we can talk about European migrants who became racially identified as white, and then how that impacted the the industries when they migrated to the United States of America. When you look at the definition of ghetto and what it meant, for example, when Irish and Italians initially lived in what we call the central business district, which are the centers of the cities. And then when we talk about assimilation into whiteness, then we talk about the central business district being the capital flight and white flight, where people moved further out of the cities. And therefore, that's how we talk about the influx of the counties and so forth. So that's why there's so much that goes into this. And so I always tell people this is not a new concept. We could also talk about it when we talk about Marcus Garvey, the huge support. Marcus Garvey focused on Black people in the United States of America for a reason, because he saw us as being potential trailblazers for a particular emphasis that he wanted, which is why I'm a UNIA member and our headquarters, of course, being in New York. And he received a lot of support in the southern states, more than the NAACP, because of course NAACP was and still is focused on racial integration, which is a huge issue that W.B. Du Bois had as a co-founder of NAACP. Although he became emphasizing racial integration, that was not always his emphasis, nor was it always the emphasis of co-founder of NAACP, Ida B. Wells. So that's why there's so much to go into this, because when we talk about the emphasis of Marcus Garvey, that also initiated some tensions when talking about Caribbean migrants, South American migrants. And this is why I always tell Black people, the attention that we take and give cannot vary based on election time, news stories, social media hashtags, and politicians and political parties. It has to be an understanding of history, what it means when we're telling people that migration has fluctuated, it has increased. So you have to, when you explain this, you have to explain in a way that's not anti-human. You have to make sure you explain in a way that's not xenophobic, meaning the fear of foreigners. Because when people tend to express this, they tend to express it in a xenophobic way because they're talking about people who are racially categorized as Black, Asian, and Indigenous, Native, who are not white. People tend not to explain issues with migrant populations when talking about a large segment of European migrants, which includes people migrating from Canada. And guess what? Many European migrants for over a century are not legal migrants. When people talk about illegal immigration, it's not only Black, Asian, and Indigenous people. That also happens in Europe. The difference is the ability to assimilate and look, quote unquote, American. So people
Wait,
ask
wait, wait.
fewer questions.
Are you saying that illegal aliens aren't just the Mexicans and the Haitians?
Well, so although alien is an official term used by INS, I don't use that term. I used to work for universities' financial aid offices. And so we know firsthand that people will get student visas to come from different nations because, of course, the idea is benefiting from the economic system, the university system, or become like a medical health professional, particularly in the United States of America, then oftentimes disappear. And that is not only done by the people who people assume it's done by, but there is an increase in that, and that's a geographic for that as well. Because when you're looking at where it's easier to migrate, because people in parts of South America will have access to people who they can pay to get them over the borders. That's a very dangerous, very violent experience. However, it still often takes people who have some kind of resources to make that happen, which is also why we talk about the difference between Dominican Republic, Haiti, and the variance in terms of how people respond to Cubans as well. So this is why I want people, when they're talking about immigration, make sure you're explaining it in a way that's not xenophobic, this hatred of people, because understand that most of us are on Western Hemisphere, either by force, which is why Africans are here, or by choice, which are migrant populations, including people born and raised in African lands who have decided to migrate over the past 50, 60, 70 years. And so it can't be a scare tactic that people focus on. If we're talking about competing in the job market, that's actually something that's very common. It's something that was discussed a century ago regarding particularly Black men and white men. Talk about during the Industrial Revolution, we talk about Irish migrants. If you read Dr. Noel Ignatieve's book, How the Irish Became White, talk about the resources that different European populations have had to use to be able to compete in the labor market. And so also sociologist Dr. Deidre Royster's book, Race and the Invisible Hand, which was published almost 20 years ago. And I went to one of her book premieres years ago, where she talked about Black men and white men competing in the labor market, and white men thought that Black men were still in their jobs. So with Black people, if Black people feel like immigrant populations are still in jobs, again, if you read Dr. John Mayer's books that we use in Race and Ethnic Relations course, you'll understand there's different waves of migrants. We'll talk about wave one, wave two, wave three, which is over the span of 50 plus years, and why the waves increase. And that oftentimes happens when pursuing lower wage labor as well.
All right. How did the Irish become white?
How did the Irish come? Why are you advertising Amazon? I am not messing with you. Okay. um,
First thing that popped up. First
I'm
thing that
not
popped
fussing
up.
with you this evening. Okay. Anyone who wants to contact me, they can actually email me. I have the full PDF of the book. A lot of books I have the PDF of.
Oh,
So I
dope.
give students free readings, hundreds of readings that are optional, and I give it to Black folks around the world. I send people share Google Drives links. You can purchase books, that's very important, but there's a reason why some of us actually share free readings online because I don't want Black people to talk about books being banned. I want us to understand that we were the first people to put book collections on street corners because we did not have access to everything else. So people who want Noel Ignatiev's How the Irish Became White book can actually contact me and I'll send them the PDF for that. Okay.
All right, code keeper. So you see the link tree under the description. Hey Doc, if you can type that in the private chat, I'll pop that on the screen as well. So if
Okay.
you want to get a copy of that book, How the Irish Became White, and we're not I'm not promoting Amazon. I just first thing that popped up. Yeah, do that. So she's going to type it in. I'll make sure it goes on the screen, code keepers, and we can learn about how the Irish became white. And you know what? The reason that I think that's important is this whole conversation: are the immigrants taking our jobs? And you actually just answered it. But I think there's a lot deeper information than what you just kind of went over as well. Um,
Mm-hmm.
wow. So is that xenophobic of me to say that immigrants are taking our jobs?
Is it xenophobic? It depends on why you're saying it. Are you saying it because you know facts, or are you saying it because you feel that you do not have a job? And you have to understand this historically and currently. White people specifically have accused Black people of stealing from white people since transatlantic slavery was considered illegal. It was this notion that this is our space and these Negroes are invading our territory. Because if people recall, Abraham Lincoln and them did not say you can be free and stay here. Abraham Lincoln and them were like, you can go back to Africa, you can go someplace else. Because basically that's when they were looking at this industrial market now. They were going to look at some new products to sell on the market, right? And it was no longer going to be Africans to sell. So the idea is like when you go to the store, they freeing up the shelves because you're bringing in more products for revenue, right? So I just want people to understand if you're really thinking that someone's stealing your jobs, you have to think about why you're conveying that. And you don't want to be hypocritical. If you do not want white people say that we're stealing white people's jobs, because a lot of Black people will say, well, this is not your jobs. These do not belong to you. It's a competitive market. That's the notion of why we have this form of capitalism, which has been integrated with forms of socialism for more than a century. So if you understand that, then you want to be careful in claiming that immigrant populations are quote unquote stealing our jobs. Instead, you want to have a more in-depth analysis of the job market, how it shifts. Number one, we look at how trade changes. For example, when Black people become more involved in certain industries and trade skills, like trade schools, become more popular, a lot of times people start to shift the emphasis and they'll say, well, trade schools are not that good after all. They do the same thing when Black people get more college degrees. All of a sudden, people say, well, college degrees are not that important. We're not really learning something. So Black people just have to understand when you're thinking about a competitive market, it's going to be based on what people oftentimes think is important, not just for local and national economics, but it's also a global economic system that we've had for generations.
Oh, that's intriguing. So yeah, we were saying yesterday how the goalpost moves. So I guess when we couldn't go to college, college was the thing, and then when we started going to college, college isn't the thing. That's intriguing.
Yes,
That's intriguing.
yes, that's exactly right. And so that's why I just want people to distinguish fact from fiction. I don't believe in people worrying about their bias because all humans have biases, but the key is just to learn and understand that some assumptions are false. sometimes you would not have gotten that job anyway, right? But we do want migrant populations to comprehend that when we're talking about struggling, poverty, people who are poor working class, and also middle class people who are living paycheck to paycheck, which is most middle class people, because people are not distinguishing income from wealth building. So most people are not building wealth. So if you understand that, then you'll be able to have those real discussions about what's really happening. You'll be able to tell people we're not opposed to people benefiting from what United States of America is proud of, still being the most capitalist of the European nations that proudly integrate capitalism with socialism. Again, still the most capitalist of these nations. So we know why people migrate here. We understand why. And we also know that business owners for particular industries benefit from lower wage labor. And we also know that people are benefiting from what Black people have done for centuries. For centuries, we have fought for racial justice, for class justice. As Africans, we've done that for thousands of years in parts of the world. And people benefit from that. Just like when we talk about affirmative action, since the 1970s, 1980s, affirmative actions has not mostly benefited Black people. It's mostly benefited white people. So you don't have to be anti-immigration and so much that you don't care if people get harmed or if people start shooting people at boundary lines in Texas and Florida. You don't have to be anti and condoning violence. Instead, you can have an honest discussion about the facts. The facts are there's people struggling in the United States of America, including Black folks who've been here, descendants of enslaved Africans for more than a century, including Mexicans who have been here for generations, because we talk about the different waves of Mexican immigrants, wave one, wave two, wave three, Asian immigrant populations, European immigrant populations. So there are people who are struggling. They understand people need resources and they need to migrate to the United States of America. But we want people to know, are you contributing to the United States of America? Are you contributing to what Black folks, for example, have done to improve the resources that we have in the United States of America? And I also explain this when our people talk about visiting Africa and contributing to our people born and raised in African lands. If you want us to contribute to our origins in Africa, we also want you to understand when you migrate to the United States of America by choice, because you're not here by force, what are you contributing to the Africans here? It has to be reciprocity. We have to, that's the origins of Pan-Africanism, Black nationalism, Black power, and pro-Black. We are contributing to Africans on every land around the world. So the same thing has to happen when we're talking about migrant populations. You want people to be safe, protected, and to benefit from economic systems without pulling from the backs of the people who've been there before them, who've been struggling. We just want people to be honest and know exactly what they're benefiting from. If you come in here as a legal migrant and you get resources, like I specialize in getting people to utilize resources that are paid through our taxes, such as EBT cards and other resources like veterans benefits. So if you're using those resources and then you start to build a business, understand that you've only been here for maybe one generation or less. So don't feel like you've just been working so hard and benefiting from your hard work. Understand that there are people who've been here for generations, centuries before you. And those tax benefits exist because of them, not because of your new arrival. And those are all just the different components I want people to address.
All right. Well, first of all, you talked about resources. So, Code Keepers, you can click on the link. There's a couple of links out there. That link will give you the PDF of how the Irish became white. That's one of the resources the good doctor is giving out tonight. Zumbi, brother. I know that the Pan African, the pro Black, the conversation that the doc has just shared sounds like it supports a lot of the information that you provide, but it also sounds like it's a little different. So where do you connect and where does yeah, how's this all work out?
Well, I was taking some notes here, and part of this may be my own personal experience. People who I would call new Africans, Africans who were born in the States, I think sometimes we have a very nasty habit of extreme xenophobia, where basically we want to label every immigrant, particularly immigrants from other parts of the African world community, as the enemy. You know, we use nasty words like quote unquote tethering, uh, things of that nature. And there seems to be this, I guess I would call it internal xenophobia that we have a tendency to promote. And a lot of it is more knee-jerk, reactionary emotionalism without understanding, you know, what role foreign policy may play in driving a lot of these migrants to the U.S. And I think that's one factor. Um, I think we also have a nasty habit of creating what I call false enemies. And I think that's what I was getting at, is that we want to paint this brush to where uh, everyone who is outside of being a new African is the enemy. Okay. Um,
It sounds to me, bro. It sounds to me like you agreeing with the doc. Is that what I'm getting? You agree with Doc?
um, I guess you would call it agree. I guess you would call it agreeing. I'm just coming from a different. Maybe I'm coming from a different angle, but we're probably reaching the same point here.
Interesting.
And
Interesting.
what I say is I have to remind new Africans here in America, okay, don't create false enemies, okay, because, and I don't know if she'll get into this later tonight, but the role of AI and automation and robotics, which starts rendering a lot of these migrants obsolete, especially the ones that they bring into the agricultural fields. What happens when robots replace them? Okay. So don't get it twisted that now all of a sudden you're going to be an honorary American when you've never been treated as an American because you were brought here as a cheap and basically a pro bono labor force.
All right. So you're agreeing that the immigrants are not the problem when it comes to job competition.
No, and it's just like what the sister was saying. It's multi-layered. Okay, being factual, understanding trends, but also understanding the genesis of what causes certain things to happen. You know, maybe I'm one of the more fortunate ones where when you get past a lot of the propaganda that's being fed, and when you begin to sit down, like I remember when I was in college, I actually had a chance to sit down with a couple of Ghanaian brothers who basically told me that when they participated in a failed coup, I think it was back in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken, they were given one or two choices. Either you can leave the country, or you can face a firing squad.
Mm.
Okay. Um, Others who are coming from other parts of the country, from those who come from Jamaica, who were forced out during the Ganja Wars, and those um, who supported Michael Manley. And then when, you know, Edward Siaga, or who they call Edward CIA Aga, um, took over Jamaica, and a lot of them fled to either the UK, Canada, or the US. So for me, I think sometimes we have to really sit down, as the sister suggested, and just really have, like you said, honest dialogue and really understand what brings people here. It could be choice, it could be circumstance, it could be a combination of things, but you never want to uh, start spewing rhetoric based on a false narrative, if that makes any sense.
All right, that does. I'm actually glad that you both are on consensus on that because that means that the facts are kind of laying themselves out to show that the crazy stuff that we're hearing is not necessarily the truth.
Mm-hmm.
But so look, I have a son, I have a daughter.
Mm-hmm.
I want them to be the most qualified, get the best jobs. How can I make sure that they're competitive?
Here's how you do that, and I take it back from what Dr. George Fraser always recommended. You must make a commitment to lifelong learning and understand that the competitive landscape is global. So you're no longer competing with somebody sitting in the same classroom as you are. So you always have to be in a state of constant and never-ending improvement. The Japanese call it kaizen. Okay, so there's no such thing as, oh, once I get to sophisticated food stamp, it's over. Okay, so
Yo,
you have to,
the sophisticated food stamp. Yo,
yeah,
you're talking
and
about
I
the
think that's a
degree, right?
mistake. Yeah, and that's a mistake that a lot of us make here in America. They think, okay, once I get this sophisticated food stamp or this sophisticated food stamp, I'm good. No, okay, you have to be committed to lifelong learning, because there's a thing called Moore's law, where information is turning over every 18 months. So what may be relevant today is irrelevant tomorrow. Okay, so that's how you keep yourself ahead of the curve.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So that's how we compete.
Mm-hmm.
We still got to be twice as good.
But don't come with that defeatist mentality of being twice as good to get half as much. Okay, if I'm twice as good, I want twice as much. Okay, and I think that's a nasty habit we picked up from the past here. It's like, I'm not going to bust my ass twice as hard for half of. No, it doesn't work that way.
Interesting.
So I do want to highlight, when you look at the Immigration Naturalization Service list of migrant categories, they do have people who are refugees. They do have people who are victims of wartime. So there are different categories. So this is something we also want people in USA to understand, similar to people in Europe who are addressing issues regarding immigration. You want to understand there's different categories. There are legal categories that also shapes the kinds of immigration cards they receive and the amount of time they're given, and how INS handles that. So people who are forced here due to wars or anything else, it's different than people who are here by choice for a job, here by choice as a student or something else like that. So we do want people to learn more factually and not fall for, I always tell people, don't fall for jargon on news stations, political parties, and social media, and even angry family members who claim that they were overqualified for everything and they never got anything. That's one thing also Deidre Royster tackles in her Race and the Invisible Handbook. And we talk about it all the time as Black folks. You can't assume that you're always the most qualified person. That's just not how grown folks operate, okay? It's just like those of us who play sports or those of us who are MCs in a rap battle. You're not going to be the best. And you might be really, really good, but it might be your day to lose, okay?
All right,
So
for the record, I'm the best.
Huh?
For the record, I'm the best. So
okay. That's an old school hip hop lyric, by the way. We are the best. Okay. But you can feel like you're the best, but it could be different circumstances, different. It could be like we talk about human capital, cultural capital, social capital. So there could be some social capitals, like Dr. Mark Vandevetter talks about the strength of weak ties. Black folks, particularly Black women, tend to struggle with making those weak ties work. What does it mean to network with people that you're not already close with, right? So you can look at it in terms of cultural capital, having cultural markers that bring people closer together. We always tell people that's part of the labor market as well. It's not just being qualified in that area of expertise. It can be your form of expression. It could be something about you that conveys that you not just know a lot by book, but you know a lot in terms of customer service, just interacting with people. It could be all types. And understanding this full span of humans, since the origins of humans, is very important so that people are not quick to jump to conclusions, because politicians and of every political party, they want people to not be informed. They want people to jump to conclusions. They want people to be outraged for no reason and to just take it really quickly and to not self-reflect on, I didn't get this opportunity, but there's possibly other opportunities. I promise you, everyone, there's some opportunities you don't get because there's better opportunities waiting for you. You just better update your resume or CV, update your skill set certifications, do some things and get out there. And so we want people to understand that when people talk about immigrant populations, yes, we do want immigrant populations to understand you're not here to compete like that, because that increases our taxpayer dollars as people in the United States of America. You can look at examples like New York City, what's happening there, where they have hotels, homeless shelters that are overly occupied by immigrant populations. It's also very unhealthy and unsafe for immigrant populations. So that's negative for human rights as well, for immigrant populations. So we do want people to realize that United States of America should not be presented as the best place in the world, in the sense that people can come here and things will be perfect, because there's no place where humans exist that are perfect. So we want people to have a more realistic assessment of what humans are doing everywhere.
I still hear in my head that thing about that thing that I've heard for, I guess, the last 30 years that says that the immigrants are draining our resources. Recently, I heard some conversation that immigrants pay as much in tax as citizens do. So, is there any truth to that? Because, like I said, for the last 30 years, I've heard that they come in here taking all the resources.
Well, facts can coexist. On one end, it is accurate that immigrant populations, especially new immigrants, and particularly new immigrant populations that have not started speaking English as well, that happens, are oftentimes using tax funded resources such as EBT, WIC, people with small children, food pantries, clothing giveaways, homeless shelters, Chromebook giveaways, the Affordable Connectivity Program, which was put on pause in April. And I want to let everyone know that it's possible that if the politicians vote that back in, that you'll be able to get discount or free internet access. But you have to have applied before April to be able to have it now, of course. So on one end, it is appropriate to feel as though these immigrant populations are pulling that. But again, United States of America cannot brag as being this most powerful nation where we have the rights and we have the resources, and then be shocked when people say, well, show me what you got. Like Flavor Flav says, show me what you got. We can't brag and then be shocked when people want you to show them what you got. So on that end, it can be factual that these resources are being utilized, and oftentimes not utilized by people born and raised in the United States of America as much as it should be. That's why I always tell people, utilize what's paid through our taxes. Sometimes I have people saying, well, I don't want a government handout. I don't want this. This is literally paid through your taxes, okay? And there are some immigrant populations, a large segment, who are paying sales taxes, and they're paying local, state, and federal taxes as well, and filing tax returns. So that's not everyone. It can vary by the legal status. It can vary by other resources. So even if you're not legally allowed to vote, you can still be legally required to file taxes. So this is why I always tell people, contact the government, the GUBMENT, contact the government. Don't ever just trust people who tell you that you can come here and not have to file taxes and you can disappear. Like I tell Black folks, there's no such thing as sovereign citizen, nomad. There's no such thing as living in a jurisdiction where you don't have to file taxes. And the same thing that needs to be understood for immigrant populations, especially if you want to start being a business owner, because that does happen with immigrant populations who start to own businesses or run franchises. The same way you're going to get that bank loan, and we could talk about the issues of that in Black parts of cities where the bank loans are given to particular immigrant populations more than to Black people for business. But the same way you want that bank loan, and you're going to be on the city planning committee and all that stuff to design it all up to benefit your business, guess what? You're going to be filing two sets of taxes, your personal taxes and now your business taxes, even if you're not a full citizen in terms of INS consideration.
In our conversations, between you and I, you said that a lot of times we waste time focusing on things that don't matter. What things, when we talk about competition, jobs, Black economics, what things matter?
If Black folks want to talk about competition, we have to talk about it in terms of what are we developing in our culture. And culture is an umbrella. So under the culture, our families, Black families, and I'm going to say Black families intentionally, okay? Black collectives, Black organizations, Black communities. So we have to understand, what are we building? What are we developing? As Harold Cruz said, the inner world. It doesn't mean we're separating ourselves, because we're not literally creating our own nation, okay? But we're developing something. So if you're feeling like there's something taken from you, now you have to ask, why are you waiting for it to be given back to you? What are we developing? This was explained by Booker T. Washington, Du Bois, Ida B. Wells had components, Anna Julia Cooper, Harold Cruz, Marcus Garvey, C.L.R. James, the list goes on of Black folks who've explained this. Like, what's being developed?
Wow. You know what, Zumbi, that sounds like be a cop. That sounds like be a cop, bro. That sounds like be a cop.
Well, I think there's something that she mentioned without mentioning. When immigrants who come to this country, they come to this country with what I call an uninterrupted cultural cohesiveness. And at least in my experience, it's very rare that you will see immigrants operate solo. They always operate in a collective, which I think gives them an advantage, particularly when it comes to entrepreneurship, because they're, aside from applying for a traditional bank loan, there are other means of financing various projects or ventures. One we're all familiar with is called the susu, which is known by, different names amongst different ethnicities. So I think we should never underestimate the power of uninterrupted cultural cohesiveness, because it allows you to move in a collective. Because the one thing, at least from my understanding, is that there is a very fragile asset that immigrant groups have over those who may be born and raised here in the US. And that asset is trust. Okay. Here, everything is done on a rugged individualism, Horatio Alger type deal, where when you see immigrants, everything is done as a collectivity. As Chuck D would say in Welcome to the Terror Dome, you move as a team. Everything is done in a collective among immigrants, which I think gives them a bit more power than those who may be here in the States, because we don't come from a mindset of a collectivity. It's about rugged individualism.
Yo, I love what you just said, bro. But bring it back to the cop joint. What's being a cop?
Well, I
think it relates.
When I talk about, and this really goes into intellectual property, where I talk about being a creator, an owner, and a protector. So you create something, you have ownership of it, and then you protect it. Now, you can protect it in a number of different ways. So let's say, and I'm just going to throw this out arbitrarily. Let's say if I come from a Spanish-speaking nation and I arrive here and I am Spanish-speaking only, I can use my language as a means of protecting my political and economic interests. We can see that whether it's in Little Havana or any other ethnic enclave that exists within the U.S. borders. Okay, so
That's interesting.
language can be used as a means of protection.
Yep. And that's the cultural component of the collectivity. So
Hmm.
when you talk about people who migrate to the United States of America, if they're not able to migrate with their family, they'll migrate with friends, or they formed a collective before they migrate. That's why most migrations are actually planned. It's not this image of people at this border that news stories depict. It's actually a lot of times planned, and they oftentimes some people will have people who they pay to help them migrate, and it's literally strategic like that.
Hmm.
And I have respect for that, because when it's strategic, it's safer in terms of personal safety, but you also have people where you've collected money together. You say, here's the money we have. We're broke in comparison to USA economic, but we have something. And when we get more, when we go to the United States of America, we'll send it to our families. So you'll also see people at thrift stores buying clothes, and people oftentimes will either sell it to send money back to families, or sometimes they'll send the clothes themselves off to families. And so these are all different models that people use. And to Black folks, I just say, why does that anger you? This is the model that Black folks have used for centuries regarding race, right? So it's a model, and we're looking at language variance, just all types of resources that people have had to utilize. And even when people are in college, when they migrate and they're in college, they will sometimes get a little apartment. Like I noticed that when I was in the doctoral program and I lived in an apartment, and there were like 10 people from East India living in this one small apartment, and not everyone had a bed. So people were on the floor. That happens particular Asian nations, particular African nations, and the list goes on. And if people in the United States of America are thinking from an individual perspective, they think that sounds stupid. I'm like, but you can't think it sounds stupid when we have poor working class people in the United States of America who literally have an entire family living in one house, right? The difference is that you're doing it where you're born and raised, and you didn't migrate to do it. But it's still the same process of, we're all going to put this all together. We're not going to assume that people can pay their own rent elsewhere. We're all going to build this together here. So it makes sense when people stop making it like a fear of foreigners, which is what xenophobia is, and they just understand it. And a lot of people criticize people in the United States of America when people in the United States of America migrate outside of America, or they come as annoying tourists. Americans are the most annoying tourists, by the way. This includes Black Americans, because you come there, it's that individualism again. So you come there and you think that everyone's going to speak English, and particularly the form of English that you were forced to speak since childhood. And you come there with this very individual mindset. And a lot of people, that's one criticism that people have of American tourists and Americans who permanently move to places, that there's this very individual mindset, a very Amerocentric and Eurocentric mindset that Black Americans also have, which of course, if you remember what happened with Liberia, since the end of transatlantic slavery, and then after and during Jim Crow, that was the issue that happened in Liberia. You know, these Africans born and raised on this land on Western Hemisphere went to Liberia, and that was the initial coup d'etat, was because the native Liberians had to eventually do something to stop these people who came from the Western Hemisphere. We understood why our people came there, because also what Marcus Garvey wanted to further. But we have to just remember, what are our people bringing to spaces? It's hypocritical to pretend we're not bringing things to other spaces that people are bringing here. We also do something similar.
Interesting.
And that also reminds me, I don't know if you guys ever watched the documentary on Showtime called Blacks Without Borders. Okay, so it basically interviewed a group of Black people from America who have expatriated to South Africa. And one individual that I really enjoyed watching was a milk farmer. He brought 30 million US dollars worth of capital. And I think after, understanding the culture of what goes on in South Africa, he created this dairy farm and basically put people to work. And one of the things that I tell people who want to expatriate to some African nation, and I kind of say it as a joke, but it's not a joke. I said, look, whatever you do, don't bring your ass to Africa broke. Okay. You must bring something of value that is mutually beneficial. So if all you bring in is kente cloth and Swahili and in Nguzo Saba, it's not doing anything for the people who are indigenous to that land. It's like, what are you bringing that will help enhance their quality of living? Okay, it's not enough to say, well, I'm going there looking for a job. No. And I dare say this, I think sometimes we go there on a parasitical tip, where we basically become nothing more than parasites. But what are we bringing to the table? If there's a buffet, what dish are you bringing?
Yep.
And I think that's where a lot of Black Americans get into trouble, and they say, well, I ain't never going to. Okay, but what was your intention going there? Were you going there to be a giver, or were you going there to be a parasite and a vampire of your own people?
A parasite and a tourist. And so that's why we talk about Ghanaians who are in the United States of America. We address what it means when we talk about the citizenship that Blacks in USA can receive when they move to Ghana. Ghanaians welcome us, but it's based on this promise, though, that you're actually bringing something, you're contributing something, which was also Marcus Garvey's emphasis, which is also why W.B. Du Bois's last years were in Ghana, because the Ghanaian president paid him to write the book and do other work. So it's, what are you contributing? Which is why I tell our people, we have to contribute to each other locally, nationally, and globally. That's the origins of Pan-Africanism. It's not you're a tourist and you're helping people elsewhere, but the people next door to you where you are 24/7, 364, because you were gone one day elsewhere, you're not helping your people locally. It has to be locally, nationally, and if you want to travel, then it has to be, you're not going to be the American tourist. Because that also happens in the Caribbean, Jamaica. American tourists are annoying. Black tourists, they consider Black tourists similar to non-Black tourists. They assume that none of us really know the original foods. By the way, we all eat the same kind of food, just kind of different seasoning and different kind of rices and all those things. But it's African commonalities. We have similar music genres, similar attire, just cultural differences that we've had to create on the lands in which we were forced. But a lot of times they treat us like Europeans, like white Americans, because a lot of times Black folks in USA arrive acting as such. They assume you don't know that it's a China-made African art piece because you haven't researched it. You showed up as just a American tourist wanting to get drunk, and they treat you the same way they treat white Americans and so forth. So this is where Black folks just have to understand, if you're anti-immigration and anti-immigrant in the United States of America, understand why a lot of countries are anti-immigration when it comes to us going there, because it's like we're pulling something. We're not contributing something. Like, we might be contributing to the tourist industry, which is oftentimes dominated by non-Blacks around the world, regardless of where you are. But a lot of times they want you to contribute something else as well.
Cool. Hey, I think we've reached commercial time. I went first last time. Zumbi, you want to show off, bro?
And it's interesting that we're having this particular dialogue. For those of you who have been watching the show, this is the book, Gospel of Afro-Economics Theology. This is a 22-year odyssey of personal experience and research in the areas of business, economics, entrepreneurship, and finance. One of the things that I'm working on now, there's a close friend of mine in the Bronx. We are working to get this book onto African soil, particularly in his hometown of Cape Town, South Africa. What he's been able to do is to teach his friends back home from this book. And we're working on figuring out a way to be able to get this book onto African soil in a very reasonably priced manner. What I'm hearing is that there are going to be distribution centers, hopefully either on African soil or close to African soil, so they would be able to order the book. So that's the latest project with my project.
Good stuff. Good stuff. And speaking of projects, let's talk about mine.
Who say that they are living paycheck to paycheck?
You will be wealthier.
My wife and I were flipping our first house.
When you shift the way you see things, then your life is going to shift.
Money is a tool for what you want. Money is not what you want. You don't want money.
So that goes to show that you don't have faith when you do not take your money and put it into those accounts to earn interest. When you're scared thinking that something is going to happen, God says, who are you trusting in? Because I'm the one that has created the money system.
Well, I then got offered $350 million for my company.
It says you owe about $538,000.
That the individual and the individual family unit is responsible for filling their own cups.
I went from being homeless and living on the street to owning properties in Baltimore.
And that's why I decided to start a bank.
This is something that Martin Luther King spoke about.
Stupid mistakes and failures. We continued stumbling forward
because the Black community, for the most part, had to go and rent.
All right, and once again, you can check out Generational Flip at generationalflip.com. Check on the bottom. The ticker says it. Generationalflip.com. That's generationalflip.com. It's worth the investment. It's going to provide you with some insight on a couple of things. And it's not holistic yet. It's not everything, but it's a place to start. So check out generationalflip.com. That's generationalflip.com. And hey, let's put up some of the good doctors' information too. You know, you shared with us earlier this link. So Code Keepers, make sure you check that out so you can get that free PDF on how the Irish became white. What other goodies you want to give out, Doc?
Well, if this was an in-person event, I'd be passing around a bag with some information about how to utilize resources. But I do want Black people to utilize resources that are paid through our taxes. These are not government handouts. These are things that you're paying for. Okay. If you don't agree with what taxes are creating, like if you're saying, well, our taxes pay for this, but I don't agree with our taxes being used for this, then that's something that people need to express to politicians, city planning committees, and so forth. But a lot of times our people are outraged and will say things like government handout, and this includes poor working class people as well. A lot of people have this misconception that poor working class Black folks are just sitting around utilizing government benefits. A lot of times it's not the case. They're not utilizing what's also paid through their taxes and also resources that were created by Black folks as well. So I want our people to utilize this, and I explain this in the work I do. If you go to my website, 365diversity.com, you'll see some of the work we do, and you scroll down, you'll find information such as my writings, my Harold Cruse writings. So I want our people to learn more about the approaches of Harold Cruse, the cooperative economic development approach that he presented. He passed away many years ago, but I want our people to learn how to integrate economic approaches. And Maggie Lena Walker is a big example of that. So Maggie Lena Walker put concepts and theories into action. So when you talk about her being the first Black woman in charge of a bank, and then she put some investment companies across the nation. And guess what? She's born and raised where I was born and raised, Richmond, VA. And she passed away many years ago, but July 15th, 2 up, 2 down, I see you. But July 15th would have been her 106th birthday. So some of us are celebrating Maggie Lena Walker. And of course we have the Maggie L. Walker School in Richmond, Virginia. And so that's an example. And this is why I tell Black people, you have to integrate an approach. You can't be so anti-establishment that you're not paying attention to anything around you that our people have utilized for centuries regarding race, and some things for thousands of years as Africans regarding other identities, because race has only existed for 5 centuries. We have to integrate approaches, which is why I integrate Harold Cruse with W.B. Du Bois, with Marcus Garvey, with Maggie Lena Walker, with Thomas Sowell, Black economist. He's 93 and still alive. I integrate that with William Julius Wilson, Black sociologist, who's 88 and still alive. It's okay to disagree with some things, but it has to be an informed disagreement, not just because it's fuzzy and you don't like the way it feels in your fingers. It has to be something more intellectual and more detailed and more informed than that. So that's why I want our people to go do some of the readings that are on my page. And then you can contact me. I can send you some shared Google Drive links for some other readings. But like Karis once said, you must learn. I really want our people to learn. Stop picking a side because that's the most popular side, because I guarantee it's usually the most popular side because it's the side that does not help Black people for the long term. There are a lot of sides that are popular because they want Black people to talk about oppression constantly. That's why most book publishing, article publishing, and groups are talking about our oppression. That's the constant topic. And it's the most popular topic for Black folks to be oppressed 24/7, 365. When it comes to solution focus, Black folks are silenced. We're told that we're not talking about oppression enough. The list goes on. I want Black folks to focus on solutions that our people have developed for centuries. So again, you can go to my website, find some of my writings with the Harold Cruz proposals. You can also see the presentation I did in April about economic plans. And economics connects with our health. It connects with education, developing school resources. Developing school resources has to happen in our families and communities. We learn and we bring knowledge into schools a lot of times. It can't be the other way around. You can't wait for other people to tell Black folks when to read, what to read, and how to read it. They can add to our knowledge, but they cannot be the source of our knowledge, okay? And that's from the beginning of when we start learning as babies. So all of that, you can contact me for more information. I want Black folks to stop choosing a side when these sides don't choose Black folks. And that includes some Black people on these sides as well. They get a lot of money, they get some grant funds, but in terms of the Black focus, it's consistently not there. And it's important to look at socioeconomic status, which is education and occupation. That's a huge emphasis. So scholars such as Dr. William Julius Wilson and Dr. Thomas Sowell, they focus on class, but William Julius Wilson focuses on the impact of race within class a lot more. So it's okay to talk about class because when we talk about class variance and inequalities when it comes to socioeconomic status, that does impact all humans, but we want Black people to know human rights have to include racial justice and it has to include Black rights. Don't fight for everyone if there's not going to be any impact that improves our people. There has to be an impact that improves our people. That's on mute, by the way. I don't hear it.
I'm just sitting here enamored by the great information that you just gave out. So I was just going to show Code Keepers that if you look up this video, you'll get a chance to hear what the good doctor is saying. I don't want to play it. I think Code Keepers should watch it themselves.
Yeah.
It's actually different than what we're talking about. But this video is dope. This video is dope. It's
not really different. So if you know about Harold Cruz, which I also mentioned Harold Cruz, Magdalena Walker, and W.B. Du Bois, Harold Cruz focused on us developing our inner world. And I use financial development. So I ask our people, what are we developing individually, financially, our families financially, and how does it impact our culture, our collectives as people? And that can have local, national, and also global emphasis for our people. And Harold Cruz explained Black politicians, Black leaders, like civil rights leaders, they can have a role, but we can't rely on them. Like we definitely cannot rely on politicians, and that includes Black politicians, because they can fly by night. You know, we don't know whose angle they're getting, especially when it comes to funds. So this is where Harold Cruz highlights what I talk about, because I specialize in art. I use art, music for everything. I put old hip hop lyrics in everything. Harold Cruz explained that we have to focus on Black artists and Black intellectuals. Black artists and Black intellectuals, they are the trailblazers. They are the ones to put this at the forefront. And so I also send people readings regarding W.B. Du Bois because he was also an artist. He was also a poet. So he and Alain Locke were different. Alain Locke believed that art is just expression, whereas W.B. Du Bois believed that art actually sends a message. Art is propaganda for a larger goal. So I also have work that I've done regarding Alain Locke. So that's why W.B. Du Bois started the Brownies book, back in the day, a century ago. And that was initially for Black children, but then he expanded it to Black and brown folks in general, which is also how NAACP colored word changed over a century as well. So yeah.
Intriguing. Yo, Doc, you're going to have to come back and give us some more information on Harold Cruz. To be honest, until you started talking about Harold Cruz, he wasn't on my radar. Zumbi, were you aware of Harold Cruz?
No.
Yeah. You're going to have to do a PowerPoint. You have to
I
get
have
us
a PowerPoint. Yeah, so the PowerPoint that I did for the April presentation is actually on the YouTube video. I actually want Black people to understand, as a professor and as an educator who does community work for now 14 years, I specialize in giving our people information. So I don't believe in people just staring at me and pretending you're listening when you might be thinking about what's for dinner, right? I want Black folks to contribute, to participate, and also to read. But if you're going to read the newer Black books, you also want to understand the origins of what Black folks have written for a century. It's like reading new Black comic books, right? You got to understand what's the Black person who started writing a Black comic book 50 years ago. Same thing pertains when we're talking about Black rights work. You can't always just read new work. You have to understand, what have we been writing forever? And how does that contribute to the new writings for our people? Because we want Black folks to write and read for centuries to come, but you can't act like this is your first time hearing it. Instead, you want to be like, this can't be the first time our people have talked about this. Let me go to the library. The public library, y'all, is paid through our taxes. Surprise, right? Go to the library. Learn what our people have presented and proposed for a long time so that you can really know the new book that you've got and how that's actually adding to the wonderful foundation. So this is one thing I tell Black folks, how to develop our knowledge. We respect authors who are doing new publications, but we also want our people to read the backdrop, and then that also helps you support new authors as well.
Cool beans. Code Keepers, I think this one has come to its natural end because you can see the good doctor has a lot to give, and we want to give her a couple other shows to give it. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Check the links, because we're going to have the links to the Google Drive that Doc was talking about, and also to the book, How the Irish Became White. That should be a topic. That should be a show.
No. Don't you waste time. I'll just say really quickly, if you got 1 minute. Okay. Again, I teach race and ethnic relations and sociology of race for 20 years. Okay. Really quickly, Irish migrants. One way, and we're not talking about indentured servants who are Irish in the Western Hemisphere. They were never enslaved in the Western Hemisphere. There are always indentured servants who were eventually given freedom long before we had the Emancipation Proclamation. Anyway, so how the Irish became white is about just explanation of one example of assimilation into racial whiteness. One of the examples of Irish migrating from Ireland was that once they learned that as long as you're anti-Black and could learn some racial slurs towards Blacks, Mexicans, Japanese, then you would definitely be accepted by white people. So that was a practice that Irish started. We're talking about white Irish. We're not talking about Black Irish, people who oftentimes were forced there due to transatlantic slavery. We're talking about white Irish who migrated here, would get off the ships from their migration, and they would say, oh, okay, I see and they would call us all types of racial slurs to convey that they are superior and they want to be accepted into the Anglo-Saxon, which doesn't really exist as a category, but that was the Protestant whiteness that was in the United States of America. And the Irish actually used Catholicism to elevate. So initially, we could talk about, the Kennedy family and how initially they were not considered to be eligible to run for elections and all that stuff. And what they did is they used Catholicism as a place to develop their own knowledge and resources and skills. So that's another thing we talk about, cultural development. That can include forms of spiritualities and religions. When people ostracize you, they have xenophobic tendencies towards you because you're Catholic and they don't consider Catholicism a form of Christianity. So therefore you use Catholicism as a way to take time together to say, how are we going to develop ourselves economically and in the political realm? So that's what the Kennedy family did as well. So those are some of the things that you'll get from that.
So that's how the Irish became white.
Those are examples, but conveying anti-Blackness is very common. Even people indigenous to Western Hemisphere, there are particular tribes that are indigenous to Western Hemisphere who conveyed anti-African, anti-Blackness to become considered white enough. Initially, when you look at it a century ago, they went to white politicians and said, we're not colored, we're not Negro, to make sure that they were not put into categories. And so that's something when you look at interracial dating, interracial marriage being very prevalent among particular collectives who are indigenous to Western Hemisphere. So that's why when we teach about race, we don't teach about race as synonymous with racism. We're teaching about it in terms of racial identities and racial collectives of people. And the groups that decided to assimilate into whiteness decided to have interracial marriages so that the children can look whiter, so that the children would not be considered indigenous. And the list goes on. Now, when we talk about like indigenous reparations, the children would still qualify for indigenous reparations because that's based on a percentage of indigenous background, as long as you have a parent, grandparent, or great-grandparent. And by the way, most people who get certain indigenous benefits are considered racially white until they want to get some kind of indigenous benefits. And that happens in financial aid offices as well.
So those are the $5 Indians, right?
Well, I don't use those because that's actually can be, well, I don't call them Indians in the first place. I call them indigenous or native to Western Hemisphere. But there would be people who, that's a form of white privilege in that sense. Just like we talk about freed men, like being a freed man means that you could have been part of enslaved Africans owned by particular indigenous collectives. But being a freed man does not mean you're literally indigenous to Western Hemisphere. It still means that you are here due to transatlantic slavery. So these are all the things that we have to explain because people oftentimes misconstrue.
Yeah, they get that stuff mixed up. All right. Well, hey, Zumbi, love you, bro. Thanks for tapping in tonight. Doc, you have a new student?
As do I. I learned from both of you, so thank you.
I show you that. Code Keepers, keep tapping in. And as we always say, well, I'm not going to do that tonight. We love y'all. Take care.